Jennifer sat at the kitchen table, staring at her cup of coffee as it grew cold. The house was quiet, save for the occasional sounds from upstairs that reminded her she wasn't alone. It had been a few months since she moved in with Richard and his son, but the feeling of being an outsider still clung to her. John was polite, attentive even, but distant. In his presence, she felt like a guest in her own home, like she was occupying a space that wasn't truly hers. He never said anything rude, never showed outright resentment, but there was something in his eyes, something hard to pin down. That evening, Richard was working late, leaving Jennifer and John alone in the house. She had offered to make dinner, but he refused with a short, indifferent response, mumbling that he had already eaten. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Finally, he settled in front of the television. Jennifer hesitated before joining him, keeping a safe distance on the opposite end of the couch. A familiar crime drama played on the screen, filling the air with the comforting hum of background noise. For a while, neither of them spoke. The occasional flicker of blue light illuminated John's face, sharp cheekbones, and unreadable expression. He was 17, at that age where moods could shift without warning, where a single word could set off a chain reaction. She had learned to tread carefully, then unexpectedly he broke the silence. "You know," he said, eyes still on the screen, "I thought you'd be different." Jennifer turned to him, caught off guard. "Different how?" He shrugged, as if deciding whether to elaborate. "I don't know, just different." A pause stretched between them, thin and taut. She wanted to press, to ask what he meant, but something in his tone told her not to. Instead, she let the moment pass, returning her gaze to the TV. Then just when she thought the conversation was over, John spoke again. This time, softer. "You look nice tonight." The words hung in the air, not quite fitting the casual atmosphere of their evening. Jennifer felt a slight shift in her stomach, an unease that she couldn't name. It wasn't the compliment itself, it was the way he said it. Not like a son to a stepmother, but like a young man testing the weight of his words. She forced a small smile, pushing the feeling aside. "Thank you," she said lightly. "That's sweet of you." John didn't reply. His eyes stayed on the screen, but something about his posture had changed. She noticed it now, the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, the subtle way he paid attention to things about her. Jennifer brushed it off. She was overthinking. Adjusting to a new family was always difficult, especially for a teenager. The days passed, and Jennifer began to notice things, small, almost imperceptible shifts in John's behavior. He was more present now, more attuned to her movements. When she walked into a room, his eyes followed. One evening she was in the kitchen washing dishes when she felt it again, that silent, lingering presence. She turned her head and found John leaning against the doorway, watching her. "You need help with that?" he asked. She smiled, shaking her head. "I'm almost done." He didn't leave. Instead, he stepped closer, reaching for a towel. "I'll dry." Jennifer hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. It was a simple offer, nothing strange about it. But as they worked side by side, she felt an OD settle between them. She told herself it was nothing. Later that night, they ended up talking in the living room. It started with something casual, school, music, movies. But then the conversation shifted. "My mom used to do that," John said suddenly, watching her as she rearranged the books on the coffee table. She paused. "Do what?" "Organize things. She couldn't stand when stuff was out of place." His voice was neutral, but there was something heavy behind it. "You remind me of her sometimes." Jennifer forced a small laugh. "I'm not sure if that's a compliment or not." "It is." His gaze was steady, unreadable. She was beautiful. The room felt too quiet. Jennifer searched for the right response, something light, something that wouldn't make this moment feel like something it shouldn't be. "I'm sure she was," she said gently. "Richard doesn't talk about her much." John's jaw tensed. "No, he doesn't." A beat of silence. "She used to hum when she cooked," he continued, his voice softer now. "You do that too." She tried to ignore the way he was looking at her. It wasn't, not exactly, but it was different. It's just the adjustment, she told herself. He's just remembering his mother, that's all. And yet, when she stood up to say goodnight, She caught it again, that flicker in his expression, like he wanted to say something else. She didn't wait for him to. Instead, she left the room, her heart beating a little faster than before. It was a Friday night, and Richard had called to say he'd be home late, again. Jennifer didn't mind, she was used to his long hours, but that meant another evening alone with John. Lately, she had been more aware of him, of the way his presence seemed to fill the spaces around her. She wasn't sure if it was in her head or if something was genuinely shifting between them. That night, John suggested they watch a movie. "I mean, unless you have something better to do," he said casually, stretching out on the couch. Jennifer hesitated but forced herself to smile. "A movie sounds good." Jennifer shifted, putting more space between them, but the air was already thick with something unspoken. Halfway through the movie, she felt his eyes on her. When she turned, he wasn't watching the screen at all, he was watching her. "John," she said, her voice low, careful. He didn't look away. Then, without warning, he leaned in. It happened too fast for her to react, his lips brushed against hers. A fleeting moment, a stolen second of something that shouldn't be. Jennifer's body went rigid. Her mind struggled to process what had just happened. "No." The word came out sharp, cutting through the silence. She pulled back, her breath unsteady. "John, no." The reality of the moment seemed to hit him all at once. His face paled. He swallowed hard, stepping away. "I didn't mean—" Jennifer stood, putting the couch between them. Her heart pounded in her chest. "This can't happen," she said firmly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Do you understand me?" He nodded quickly, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Please, God, don't tell my dad." Jennifer exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her forehead. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was something dangerous, something that couldn't be ignored. But looking at him now, seeing the sheer panic in his eyes, she knew one thing for certain. Nothing would be the same after this. The days that followed were tense. John barely spoke. Jennifer avoided being alone with him. At breakfast, he kept his head down. At dinner, he ate in silence. The house felt colder, heavier. One afternoon, she found him in the garden, fixing a broken fence post. He didn't look up. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I want to," he muttered. She hesitated, then handed him a glass of water. A silent truce. Later, he lingered by the kitchen door. "I'm sorry," he said again. Jennifer met his eyes. "Sorry isn't enough." "I know." And he did. That was the only reason she didn't walk away. One night, Jennifer heard noises outside. She found John in the garage, struggling with a heavy toolbox. "What are you doing?" she asked. He wiped his forehead. "Fixing the loose stair rail. It's been bothering me." She sighed but let him continue. It was his way of making things right. The next morning, she found a small note on the counter. "Thank you for giving me a chance to be better." Jennifer exhaled slowly. Their family was flawed, imperfect, but maybe, just maybe, they were finding a way forward.